So I think language, dinner table manners are interesting. Cell phones having a part in that nowadays is kind of some interesting conversations. People are going to have to come up with new policies actually using language to probably hamper individuals using language on social media, which is a fascinating kind of concept in this 21st century. Um, how does our language change over time? That's kind of important as well. Um, it is fascinating. I would say that when I was younger, our language towards elders was supposed to be much more um, respectful, cordial, sir, kind of those kinds of terms. And I would say that that's fading very, very quickly. That has a lot to do with language change. Um, so language and power, charismatic voice, emotional appeal to the audience has to do with pathos. Um, again, individuals sometimes have what we would call charisma, and I'm still kind of searching to describe what charisma is. I think that it has a lot to do with situational negotiation of identity and cultural place and identity at the time. So I feel like sometimes charismatic voices are just loud noise. But if there is a need or a perceived need for that voice or that concept, people tend to be more accepting of it. Hegemony is power to convince without the threat of force. Hegemony has a lot to do with kind of this power and voice and language. Again, you don't necessarily need to threaten or force people. You can just kind of say, well, all right, well, we're the #1 economy in the world, so you can get on board or not. That's not really threatening, but it's definitely exercising our hegemonic power. I talked about power suggestion, realize how powerful it really is, and realize that in this, people are going to do one of two things, and that is either knowledge transfer, right? If we suggest something, they're going to take that information, they're going to make it their own, and sometimes they won't combat you. The other option is basically to utilize conflict theory, which is to start with no, and then usually that's to slow the conversation down, the dialectic process down when somebody says no to your idea or suggestion. And then they're going to turn that idea into their own somehow, giving you back their own thesis. And people do this often, especially in America, where individuality is kind of focused and is revered. So yeah, so that's the power suggestion is you guys should do some analysis and observation around suggestion and body language and some of those things this week if you can. Taglines, we have these all the time, right? Also kind of moving towards cliche, breakfast of champions, be all that you can be. These are things that are supposed to inspire us. And we know what they mean, right? They're idioms that we kind of understand the terms and why they are what they are. But if you told these things to different culture groups, they would have no idea. And it's because we've been taught these concepts through these lexicons and syntax. Branding. Political branding, Republican and Democrats, again, picking a symbol for your team, like the donkey and the elephant. Those kind of were branded on political parties based on what past presidents said, and even the elephant was an escapee from a zoo, and they kind of stuck. Again, these are like symbolic brands. Branding politically is fascinating as well. It takes a long time for language to become different. I would say that the socialism was very, very bad up until just this last kind of election cycle when Bernie Sanders did fairly well, to my surprise, using the word socialist. And it's because the term has been kind of lessened, right? The Cold War hasn't been around for 30 years, so people are less scared of the word socialism. Advertising, use of language to bring exposure to sell products or ideas. Again, in the 1950s, advertising was so successful because your heroes in these sitcoms would stop the show basically and say, "And I smoke Lucky cigarettes," and that was so powerful that they had to stop doing it. So advertising can be very real. Remember, power suggestion through advertising is very connected. Talking points are important things that individuals and communities and the media tend to focus on. Again, talking points. The whole Trump election has been Russia and the investigation. To be honest, this is a talking point on the side of media. And then to the opposite, Trump uses fake news as his kind of soundbite talking point as well, and attacking the media. Soundbites, new form of news reporting that simplifies problems and solutions. Soundbites are a fascinating thing. I would say that in the past, at least Americans tended to be more into the analysis and the dialectic process of learning as much as they could about a situation and an event or people. And now it's all about people not even reading the full article, just reading the byline and thinking that they know exactly what they're talking about. These are sound bites. And it's turned us into, at least those of us, and I'm guilty to a certain degree as well, it's turned us into kind of simplified learners or participants in the political process. And simplification, again, is no judgment necessarily, because maybe we're substituting that with time in some other area of our life. But it is definitely a simplification. It's not as in-depth in terms of analysis. The written word. So canonization of writing, remember, really starts to happen around 500 BCE with the Axial Age. Now I'm flashing back to kind of week 1. And what it means is codifying oral traditions through writing. And I would say that canonization and writing down things really becomes popular during the Axial Age, but writing definitely happened before that, right? 2000 BCE, we're talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh. 1750 BCE, we're talking about the Hammurabi Code. So we start to get some canonization around these things. When things are written, it becomes much more difficult to argue with. And this is why we write down the Constitution and we write these things down. These are words that we have to stick to. It really does help to create a binary structure, by the way, in terms of civilization. If we had oral traditions, we would be able to work through those, and sociolinguistics would change based on technology changes and changes in culture. Written doctrine, laws, and belief structures that are codified. Imagined communities, again, this has come up over and over in this class because it's very important in terms of nationalism. Benedict Anderson believed that the written word in his book, in the form of newspapers, bound the nation together by creating common vernacular. So this is a fascinating aspect and analysis of Benedict Anderson's work. Ultimately, what he says is that, Americans were super discombobulated until we had written word like Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine. Once we had that and the literate individuals could read Common Sense, it was a pamphlet, it wasn't that long, and could tell everybody about it, he codified our language as the colonies and created this other. He really does create a binary structure, to be honest, in terms of the colonies versus England and why we should not follow England. And Benedict Anderson kind of points out that this is when this really starts to solidify this national identity. And it's not just in America, it's in Europe, it's all over the place in terms of national media being written down and codifying our vernacular and utilizing language to create this imagined community where we're not going to meet somebody in Nebraska, in Okeechobee, Nebraska, but we are going to think that they understand the same language that we're using and the same symbols, and this is going to be part of that imagined community. Written word does help create these binary structures, especially in English. It hasn't always, but we have been using it more and more in this binary structure, which is kind of this my team, your team effect. And again, I'd say that this has definitely implications in terms of society and social cohesion. Durkheim would be very interested, intrigued, and concerned about our kind of move in terms of functionalism and dysfunction of our binary language structure, which Levi-Strauss would definitely be in heaven analyzing right now. Again, language is super important. And I would challenge you for the week is to go out and kind of see if these things are holding true, right? When you start to think of a concept, realize that you're using language to do it, and that's Sapir-Whorf. When you hear a new slang term and you're like, wow, I haven't heard that term, but now I know what they're talking about, sociolinguistics, right? So analyze language. It's every day in our face. It's a little less abstract than some of these other ideas in cultural anthropology. So just kind of test yourself in the field and maybe apply that to that challenge, apply that to kind of your research paper that you'll hopefully be working on soon, and I hope to hear about very soon. All right, have a great week.